Forbidden knowledge. Why Book of Jubilees was banned. What if I told you that the Bible we know might be missing some incredible details about creation, the patriarchs, and even God's laws? Meet the Book of Jubilees, an ancient text preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible. It claims to fill in these gaps, unveiling hidden stories and offering a deeper understanding of God's grand plan. But here's the kicker. Jubilees was banned from most of the Christian world. Why? What secrets does it contain that were deemed too controversial? In today's video, we'll dive into the mysterious Book of Jubilees, also called Little Genesis, and uncover why its 50 chapters were excluded from mainstream Christianity. This ancient text goes beyond the Genesis narrative we know, introducing cosmic insights about angels, divine timekeeping, and commandments passed down long before Moses. And it doesn't stop there. Jubilees even claims our modern calendar is all wrong. According to this text, God himself gave humanity a sacred structure of time, one that aligns perfectly with his divine will. But few follow it anymore. Why was this radical idea rejected by the early church? Let's start at the beginning. While Genesis tells us about the creation of earth, Jubilees expands the story, explaining that before God formed the world, he also created time. Not just any time, a sacred calendar designed to keep humanity in sync with him. This divine calendar is solar, with 364 days divided into 4 perfect seasons of 91 days each. It's precise, unchanging, and ensures that sacred days like the Sabbath and festivals always align with their proper times. In fact, Jubilees argues that the irregular lunar calendar, adopted by many ancient cultures, disrupts God's divine order. It even warns that following the wrong calendar leads to chaos. There will be those who make observations of the moon, but they will disturb the seasons and make an abominable day the day of testimony. Jubilees 6:37. But this is more than just a debate about calendars. Jubilees reveals how angels themselves were created on the first day and tasked with maintaining the universe, including time. They guide the sun, moon, and stars along their divinely ordained paths. When humanity strays from this heavenly rhythm, the result is spiritual disorder. And that's just the beginning. The Book of Jubilees also highlights the Sabbath as not only a weekly day of rest, but as the cornerstone of God's divine timekeeping system. According to Jubilees, the Sabbath governs all cycles of time, including Jubilee years, periods of renewal that bring creation back into harmony with its Creator. For he sanctified the 7th day and blessed it for all times as a sign of holiness for all his works. Jubilees 2:1. So, why was this book excluded from the Bible? Was it the challenge to accepted timekeeping, or its radical claim that even the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, followed God's laws long before Moses? And here's something fascinating. The Ethiopian calendar, still used today, resembles the sacred structure described in Jubilees. Could this be a remnant of the divine rhythm humanity has forgotten? What do you think? Is the Book of Jubilees an overlooked treasure, offering a deeper connection to God's eternal plan? Or just another apocryphal text? If you're as intrigued by these mysteries as we are, share this video with friends, like and subscribe to Deep Bible Stories. Let's explore these ancient texts together and uncover the hidden layers of God's timeless wisdom. Creation. In the Book of Jubilees, Adam's creation follows the familiar story from Genesis, but with some fascinating new details. While Genesis tells us Adam was created on the 6th day, Jubilees adds an important twist. Right after Adam was created, God gave him specific commandments. These included laws about observing the Sabbath, maintaining purity, and rules for marriage and worship. Delivered by angels, these laws were meant for Adam and all his descendants, forming the foundation of the covenant between God and humanity. While Genesis mentions God's direct interaction with Adam, Jubilees introduces angels as mediators who taught Adam how to follow God's commandments. These angelic beings, especially the angels of the presence, ensured that Adam and Eve understood the divine laws regarding holiness, sacrifice, and moral conduct. And on the 6th day of the 2nd week, we brought, according to the word of God, to Adam all the beasts, all the cattle, all the birds, and everything that moves on the earth and in the water, according to their kinds. Jubilees 3:1-2. This angelic role emphasizes that God's laws weren't human-made. They were part of a divine, heavenly order. The angels taught Adam that these laws were eternal, and they themselves followed them in the heavenly realm. Could it be that God's commandments were handed down through angels long before Moses received the 10 Commandments? If you're curious about how Adam's laws compare to Moses' commandments, let us know in the comments. Should we dive deeper into these ancient laws? Cain and Abel. After the fall of Adam and Eve, Jubilees gives us a deeper look into the story of Cain and Abel. While Genesis briefly tells us that Cain killed Abel, Jubilees adds important context to this tragic event. Cain's murder of Abel is presented as the first major breach of God's law, an act with far-reaching spiritual consequences. Although Cain is cast out, Jubilees highlights that the righteous line continues through Seth, Adam's third son. Seth is portrayed as a righteous figure, taught by angels to follow the divine laws. This sets the stage for future generations, including Noah, to continue the covenant with God. The flood Noah's story and the Great Flood are familiar from Genesis, but Jubilees offers extra details, focusing not only on Noah's survival, but also on the covenant God made with him afterward. This covenant emphasized purity, righteousness, and adherence to God's laws. Before the flood, Jubilees goes into more depth about the earth's corruption, especially the Nephilim, the offspring of fallen angels and human women. While Genesis 6:1-4 mentions the Nephilim briefly, Jubilees reveals their role in spreading wickedness, contributing to the moral decay that led God to cleanse the earth with the flood. And lawlessness increased on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way, like men, cattle, beasts, birds, and everything that walks on the earth. All of them corrupted their ways and their orders, and they began to devour one another. Jubilees 5:2. This corruption wasn't just due to human sin. It was also caused by fallen angels who introduced forbidden knowledge, disrupting the natural order. God's response was swift. He sent the flood to cleanse the earth, but preserved Noah and his family because of their righteousness. After the flood, Jubilees reveals that God didn't just promise never to flood the earth again. He also established a new covenant with Noah, with specific laws regarding purity and sacrifice. These laws, later formalized in the Mosaic law, were designed to help humanity stay holy and avoid the corruption that led to the flood. Notably, Noah was instructed to observe the Sabbath and follow the same laws given to Adam concerning sacrifice and purity. This covenant marked a fresh start for humanity, focusing on obedience to God's laws to avoid further judgment. Abraham's youth. While Genesis introduces Abraham when God calls him to leave his homeland, Jubilees takes us back to his early years, revealing that he grew up in a family steeped in idolatry. His father, Terah, worshipped false gods. This detail, missing from Genesis, adds a powerful layer to Abraham's story. Jubilees paints a vivid picture of young Abraham rejecting the pagan practices around him and instead choosing to follow the one true God. And he said to my father, "Tell me, what is this idol you worship?" And Abraham saw that it was an image of stone. And Abraham burned them before the eyes of all and fled into the wilderness. Jubilees 11:16-17. While Genesis focuses on Abraham's obedience to God's call to leave his homeland, Jubilees presents him as a revolutionary figure who boldly destroys the idols in his father's house and rejects idolatry. This act of spiritual rebellion set the stage for Abraham's later role as the father of God's chosen people, those who would abandon pagan practices to follow God's laws. Abraham and divine laws. A key difference between Genesis and Jubilees is the idea that Abraham followed divine laws long before Moses. While Genesis mentions only the covenant of circumcision in Genesis 17, Jubilees shows Abraham as someone who adhered to divine commandments given by angels as part of a sacred covenant that existed even before the law of Moses. In Jubilees, Abraham is presented as someone who already observed the Sabbath, made sacrifices, and followed other laws typically associated with Moses. According to Jubilees, these laws were not invented during Moses' time, but were passed down from the angels to the patriarchs, beginning with Adam. Abraham received these commandments from angels and was expected to follow them as part of his covenant relationship with God. And he was taught by the angels concerning the things written in the tablets of heaven, Jubilees 12:25. Unlike Genesis, where Abraham's actions are seen as part of his personal faith journey, Jubilees presents him as someone involved in a cosmic plan. He is guided by angels, and the laws he follows are part of a divine order that governs both heaven and earth. These laws include the Sabbath and various purity laws that Moses would later formalize. The covenant of circumcision is one of the most important moments in Abraham's story. In Genesis 17, God commands Abraham to circumcise himself and all the males in his household as a sign of the covenant. However, Jubilees expands on this, revealing that circumcision was not merely symbolic but part of a cosmic law written on the heavenly tablets. According to Jubilees, circumcision was not just a sign for Abraham's descendants, but a divine law that had existed since the creation of the world. This law is for all the generations forever, and there is no circumcision of the days, and no passing over one day out of the 8 days, for it is an eternal ordinance ordained and written on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 15:25. In Genesis, the focus is on Abraham's obedience to God's command. In Jubilees, this act is portrayed as part of a much larger divine order. Circumcision is not just a physical sign. It is a way of aligning oneself with the cosmic laws governing the universe. The binding of Isaac. The story of the binding of Isaac, also known as the Akedah, is one of the most powerful moments in Genesis, Genesis 22:1-19. In this narrative, God tests Abraham's faith by asking him to sacrifice his son, Isaac. Jubilees retells this story, but with added layers of meaning. In Jubilees, the test is not merely a private trial between Abraham and God, but part of a larger spiritual warfare. According to the text, the angel Mastema, a figure often associated with Satan, suggests this test to God, hoping that Abraham will fail. Mastema represents the forces of evil, constantly seeking to undermine the righteous. Jubilees also adds that angels intervened during the binding. God allowed the test to demonstrate that Abraham's faith was greater than the temptations of evil. And I stood before him and before the prince of Mastema, and the Lord said, Command him not to lay his hand on the lad, nor to do anything to him, for I have shown that he fears the Lord. Jubilees 18:10. This version of the story introduces a cosmic dimension. It's not just a test of Abraham's obedience, but part of the ongoing battle between good and evil. While Mastema tries to lead Abraham into failure, God's intervention proves that faithfulness triumphs over evil. Jacob and Esau. In Genesis 25:23, God reveals to Rebekah, before Jacob and Esau are even born, that the two brothers will lead two nations and that the older Esau will serve the younger Jacob. Jubilees expands on this prophecy, emphasizing that this was not just a family feud, but part of a cosmic design. Jacob was always meant to inherit the blessing and continue the line of righteousness that began with Abraham. Jubilees adds a layer of predestination. revealing that Jacob was chosen from birth to carry on the covenant, while Esau was destined to stray from God's plan. The text even notes that Isaac and Rebekah were given divine knowledge about Esau's rebellious nature and his descendants' opposition to Israel. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations shall be divided from your womb, and one nation shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Jubilees 19:13. Genesis reference: 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Genesis 25:23. While Genesis portrays this struggle through Jacob's cunning and Esau's impulsiveness, Jubilees explains that Jacob's actions, although deceptive, were part of fulfilling a divine plan. In Jubilees, Esau is more than just a brother who loses his birthright. He represents a line of rebellion against God's chosen people. His descendants are depicted as a nation that will rise in opposition to Israel, fulfilling the prophecy that the elder will serve the younger. While Genesis briefly mentions hostility between Esau and Jacob after the birthright and blessing incidents, Genesis 27:41, Jubilees expands on this theme. It shows how Esau's descendants would become a nation that directly opposes Jacob's line, the future Israelites. This reflects the cosmic conflict between righteousness, Jacob, and rebellion, Esau. And Esau took his wives and his sons and all that he had and went up to the hill country of Seir and lived there. And Esau became a nation, and they oppressed Jacob's descendants. Jubilees 37:1. Genesis reference: So Esau, that is Edom, settled in the hill country of Seir. Genesis 36:8. Jubilees makes it clear that Esau's rebellion was not merely personal, but national. His descendants, the Edomites, would have numerous conflicts with the Israelites, reflecting the spiritual battle that began with their forefathers. Jubilees goes even further, emphasizing that Jacob was given not just a blessing, but also a continuation of the divine laws that had been passed down from Abraham. According to Jubilees, after Jacob receives the blessing, God and the angels reveal to him the laws that he and his descendants must follow. These include the observance of the Sabbath, purity laws, and the sacred calendar, laws that would later become formalized in the Mosaic law. Jacob is portrayed as the keeper of these laws, tasked with ensuring that his descendants, the future Israelites, follow them as part of their covenant relationship with God. And the Lord appeared to him by night and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father and the God of Isaac. The land whereon you are sleeping I give to you and your seed shall be as the stars of heaven. Jubilees 27:23. Genesis reference: I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. Genesis 28:12-15. In Jubilees, the laws that Jacob receives are part of the cosmic order that governs both heaven and earth. This emphasis on Jacob as the inheritor of divine law elevates his role beyond simply receiving a birthright. He becomes the custodian of God's eternal commandments, linking him to the heavenly tablets mentioned earlier in Jubilees. Jacob and Esau. A cosmic rivalry. Jubilees doesn't stop at the rivalry between Jacob and Esau. It expands this conflict into a prophetic vision of the ongoing struggle between their descendants. The book suggests that the nations arising from Esau will continually oppose Jacob's descendants, the Israelites, throughout history. This goes beyond a personal feud between two brothers, tying into the broader theme of a spiritual battle between righteousness, Jacob, Israel, and rebellion, Esau, Edom. In Jubilees, this prophetic struggle is not merely about territorial conflict, but is part of the greater cosmic war between the forces of good and evil. Esau's line represents nations that will become enemies of God's chosen people, a tension that persists throughout biblical history. This spiritual opposition between Israel and Esau's descendants plays a key role in Jubilees' apocalyptic vision, linking the conflict to the end times. And Jacob and his sons came down into Egypt to Joseph, and Esau's sons remained in the land of Edom. From that day, the enmity between the nations remained. Jubilees 45:3. Genesis reference: so that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Genesis 33:16. This vision of an ongoing spiritual struggle reflects the broader themes of Jubilees, where the story of the patriarchs is part of a larger cosmic plan involving the destinies of nations and the ultimate battle between good and evil. The birth of Jacob's 12 sons. In Genesis, the birth of Jacob's 12 sons through his wives Leah and Rachel and their maidservants is recorded as a narrative event. Genesis 29:31-30-34. These 12 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph and Benjamin, become the heads of the tribes of Israel. Jubilees, however, adds a layer of divine order to their births, showing that they were not merely the result of human relationships, but part of a predetermined plan set by God. According to Jubilees, the timing and sequence of their births were ordained by God to align with the sacred calendar. The book emphasizes that each son was born according to a divine schedule, making their births part of the larger cosmic plan. And Jacob's wives and maidservants gave birth to his 12 sons, each according to the time set by the Lord, and their destinies were written on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 28:12. While Genesis focuses on the narrative details, Jubilees stresses that their births were recorded on the heavenly tablets, reinforcing the idea that the 12 tribes were part of God's predestined plan for the world. Reuben's disqualification. One significant moment in Genesis is the story of Reuben, Jacob's eldest son, who loses his status as the firstborn after committing a grave sin. Genesis 35:22. Jubilees expands on this event, emphasizing its spiritual consequences and explaining why Judah and Levi rise to prominence in his place. In Jubilees, Reuben's sin is framed as a violation of divine laws that had been established long before. His actions are seen not just as a personal failing, but as a spiritual transgression that disqualifies him from leading the tribes. This allows Judah, the 4th son, to emerge as the tribal leader, and Levi to take on the priestly role, both in accordance with God's divine order. Because of his sin, the firstborn Reuben was not reckoned in the inheritance. Judah was chosen as the prince over his brothers, and Levi for the priesthood forever. Jubilees 33:10. Genesis reference: Reuben, you are my firstborn. Unstable as water, you will not excel. Genesis 49:3-4. While Genesis mentions Reuben's disqualification, Jubilees places stronger emphasis on how this event aligns with the cosmic plan. Judah's rise is depicted as part of God's eternal law, while Levi is set apart for the priesthood, connecting their destinies to the larger spiritual framework governing Israel's future. Levi and the eternal priesthood. In the Bible, the tribe of Levi is set apart for the priesthood, with Moses and Aaron descending from this tribe, Exodus 28. Jubilees, however, frames Levi's role as part of an eternal mandate. The book emphasizes that Levi's priesthood was not just a tribal duty, but an office established on the heavenly tablets long before it was formalized under Moses. According to Jubilees, Levi was chosen by God to be the spiritual leader of the tribes, responsible for ensuring that the divine laws were observed. His priestly role is described as part of the cosmic order, connecting heaven and earth. And Levi was set apart for the priesthood forever, to offer sacrifices and to mediate between the people and the Lord, for it was ordained on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 32:17. Genesis reference: The priesthood of Levi's descendants is formalized in Exodus 28. This makes Levi's priesthood not just a response to historical circumstances, but an essential part of the cosmic order that predates the events at Mount Sinai. In Genesis, the 12 sons of Jacob go on to become the heads of the 12 tribes, and their journeys unfold as they eventually settle in the Promised Land. However, in Jubilees, the tribes are not merely inheritors of land. They are portrayed as guardians of God's law, tasked with upholding the divine commandments passed down from Abraham and Isaac. According to Jubilees, each tribe carries a specific spiritual responsibility and is expected to follow the laws written on the heavenly tablets. The book emphasizes that the 12 tribes were chosen not only to inherit the land, but also to serve as stewards of God's commandments, ensuring their observance by all generations. And the Lord said unto Jacob, These are the laws for your sons and their descendants forever, written on the heavenly tablets, that they may walk in them and live. Jubilees 29:6. Genesis reference, Genesis 49, Jacob's blessings to his sons. While Genesis tells us that Jacob's sons became the heads of tribes, Jubilees adds that they were also entrusted with the responsibility of ensuring the Lord's laws were passed down to future generations. Each tribe plays a cosmic role in preserving the divine order, connecting their actions to the spiritual destiny of Israel. Joseph's betrayal and cosmic implications. In Genesis, Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery, motivated by jealousy over their father's favoritism, Genesis 37. Jubilees, however, reframes this event in terms of cosmic consequences. According to Jubilees, the brothers' act of betrayal is not just a family dispute, it is a grave transgression against the divine order, with guilt that extends far beyond what is depicted in Genesis. In Jubilees, the act of selling Joseph is described as a serious sin against God's heavenly law, and the brothers are warned of divine punishment unless they repent. This perspective shifts the focus from personal jealousy to the cosmic implications of their actions. Their betrayal disrupts the divine plan and places them under God's judgment. And his brothers sold Joseph into slavery, and their sin was recorded on the heavenly tablets, for they had transgressed the eternal laws. It was decreed that their descendants would suffer until they repented for their great sin. Jubilees 34, 4-9. This emphasis on the heavenly tablets makes their sin part of a larger cosmic order, linking their actions to the future suffering of Israel under Egyptian bondage. Their betrayal sets the stage for God's plan to redeem Israel through the Exodus, a plan foretold in the heavenly realm. Joseph's rise to power, a heavenly plan. In Genesis, Joseph's rise to power in Egypt is attributed to his wisdom and ability to interpret dreams, Genesis 41. Jubilees, however, expands on this narrative by explaining that Joseph's success was part of a divine plan written on the heavenly tablets. His accomplishments were not merely the result of his abilities, but were foreordained by God to fulfill a specific role in the salvation of Israel. Jubilees emphasizes that Joseph's rise to power was designed to create the circumstances leading to the Exodus. His destiny was to bring his family to Egypt, where they would eventually become enslaved and later delivered through God's miraculous intervention. And it was written on the heavenly tablets that Joseph would rule over Egypt, and through him the sons of Israel would be saved from famine, but they would also be bound in Egypt for a time. Jubilees 42:2. Joseph's life is thus portrayed as a cosmic event, with his rise to power serving a much larger purpose in God's plan for Israel's deliverance. Angelic involvement in Joseph's life. One of the most intriguing additions in Jubilees is the involvement of angels in Joseph's story. While Genesis portrays Joseph as having a close relationship with God through his dreams, Jubilees introduces the role of angels in guiding and protecting him. According to Jubilees, Angels were sent by God to watch over Joseph from the moment he was sold into slavery, ensuring that he would fulfill his destiny in Egypt. These angels intervened at key moments in Joseph's life, protecting him from harm and ensuring his faithfulness to God. And the Lord sent his angels to guard Joseph on his journey to Egypt, that he might not perish. For his life was precious in the eyes of the Lord, and his path had been written on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 34:21. This detail adds a layer of spiritual protection to Joseph's story, showing that his journey was not just a series of fortunate events. It was carefully orchestrated by God, with angelic oversight ensuring his rise to power and the salvation of his family. Joseph's role in the Exodus. One of the most significant differences between Genesis and Jubilees is how Joseph's life connects to the Exodus. In Genesis, Joseph's story ends with his family settling in Egypt. In Jubilees, however, his life is portrayed as prophetic, foreshadowing the enslavement and eventual deliverance of the Israelites. According to Jubilees, Joseph's rise to power in Egypt was not just about saving his family from famine, but also about fulfilling a prophecy that would lead to the Exodus. Jubilees explains that Joseph was aware of the future bondage of his descendants and played a role in preparing them for their eventual deliverance. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I will die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Fear not, for these things have been written and sealed on the heavenly tablets." Jubilees 46:9. Israel's enslavement was not only the beginning of their suffering, but also a prophetic promise that they would eventually be delivered from Egypt. This ties Joseph's life directly into the cosmic plan of redemption, which would be fulfilled through the Exodus. In the Book of Genesis, Israel's enslavement begins when a new Pharaoh comes to power, one who does not know Joseph, and begins to oppress the Israelites. Exodus 1:8-14. However, in Jubilees, this period of enslavement is seen as part of a cosmic prophecy written on the heavenly tablets. According to Jubilees, God had foretold the bondage of Israel long before it happened, and it was part of his plan to lead them toward the Exodus and the giving of the Mosaic law. This prophetic plan connects directly to Joseph's role in bringing Israel to Egypt. While Joseph saved Israel from famine, their time in Egypt was predestined to end in enslavement. This period of bondage would ultimately serve to demonstrate God's power in delivering his people. And it was written on the heavenly tablets that they would be oppressed in Egypt, and that God would bring them out with great power and wonders so that his name would be glorified. Jubilees 48:1. This perspective frames Israel's time in Egypt not merely as a historical event, but as part of a larger spiritual narrative, where their enslavement and eventual exodus were preordained for God's glory. The suffering of the Israelites is portrayed as a necessary trial to prepare them for the laws they would receive at Mount Sinai. Spiritual warfare in Israel's enslavement. In Exodus, God acts directly to bring about the plagues and deliver Israel from Pharaoh's oppression. Exodus 7-12. However, Jubilees adds a layer of spiritual warfare to the story, introducing angels and spiritual entities as key players in the conflict between God and Pharaoh. According to Jubilees, the oppression of Israel was part of a spiritual battle between the forces of good and evil. Mastema, a figure often associated with Satan, is portrayed as actively hardening Pharaoh's heart and increasing Israel's suffering. Mastema and his evil spirits are said to have encouraged the Egyptians to oppress Israel even more harshly, testing their faithfulness to God. And the prince of Mastema stood against them, and he sought to destroy them with hard bondage, and to cause them to forsake their faith in the Lord. Jubilees 48:9. This interpretation gives a cosmic dimension to Israel's enslavement. It was not just a matter of political power, but also spiritual forces attempting to undermine God's plan for Israel's deliverance. The plagues of Egypt are presented as part of this cosmic battle, with God's power overwhelming the forces of Mastema at every turn. The timing of the Exodus and the heavenly tablets. In Jubilees, the heavenly tablets play a central role in explaining how the laws and the timing of the Exodus were part of God's eternal plan. The Exodus, according to Jubilees, was not simply a reaction to Israel's suffering, but was preordained according to the divine calendar. The book emphasizes that the timing of the Exodus was tied to the observance of sacred laws, and that Israel's deliverance was meant to align them with the divine order. And it was written on the heavenly tablets that on the 14th day of the first month, at the appointed time, God would bring Israel out of Egypt. For this was the day set apart from the beginning of creation. Jubilees 49:1. This unique detail from Jubilees contrasts with Exodus, which focuses primarily on the events leading up to and during the plagues. Jubilees introduces the idea that the Exodus was not merely a historical event, but part of the spiritual fabric of creation, preordained to reveal God's glory and establish his covenant with Israel. Cosmic significance of the plagues. The 10 plagues in Exodus 7 through 12, are a dramatic display of God's power, meant to force Pharaoh to release the Israelites. In Jubilees, the plagues are given cosmic significance. They are not only acts of divine judgment, but also symbolic acts representing the defeat of Egypt's gods and the spiritual forces behind them. According to Jubilees, each plague was a direct challenge to the false gods of Egypt, demonstrating that only the God of Israel held true power over heaven and earth. And the Lord sent the plagues upon Egypt not only to judge Pharaoh, but to show that the gods of Egypt were nothing before him, for they were false powers unable to stand before the Almighty. Jubilees 48:11. This interpretation positions the plagues as part of a larger cosmic conflict between good and evil. Mastema and his forces worked to prevent Pharaoh from releasing the Israelites, but God's power defeated them at every turn, showcasing his sovereignty over both physical and spiritual realms. The Mosaic Law and the heavenly tablets. In Exodus, Moses receives the law directly from God on Mount Sinai. Jubilees, however, adds the detail that these laws were not created at that moment. Instead, they were already inscribed on the heavenly tablets long before Moses' time. According to Jubilees, the heavenly tablets serve as a cosmic record of all of God's laws, established at the very beginning of creation. They act as a guide for both angels and humans. This suggests that Moses was simply the human recipient of laws that had been preordained for all time, and the law and the testimony were ordained and written on the heavenly tablets, created even before the foundation of the world, so that they might guide all the generations of the children of Israel. Jubilees 1:27. Jubilees 6:17 introduces a fascinating perspective on the Mosaic Law, emphasizing that it was not a sudden revelation, but part of a cosmic plan. While Exodus focuses on the dramatic moment when the law was given at Mount Sinai, Jubilees asserts that these laws were already written in heaven, awaiting the right time to be revealed to Moses and the Israelites. One of the most intriguing aspects of Jubilees is its claim that the Mosaic Law was observed long before Moses. The traditional Bible portrays Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as righteous individuals, but does not specify that they adhered to the full law. Jubilees, however, contends that the patriarchs were already observing the Sabbath, performing sacrifices, and following many laws that would later be codified for Israel. This makes the Mosaic Law not a new development, but a restoration of laws passed down from the beginning of time. The patriarchs are said to have received these commandments through divine revelation and angelic guidance. For example, Abraham is described as keeping the Sabbath and observing dietary laws long before these were officially given to Israel. For Abraham kept the Sabbath, circumcised his sons, and followed the commandments of the Lord that were written on the heavenly tablets. The law was revealed to him through the angels of God. Jubilees 16:28. In this way, Jubilees portrays the law as a timeless code given to all the righteous from Adam onward, with Moses chosen to deliver it in its complete form to the nation of Israel. The cosmic calendar in Jubilees. One of the unique contributions of Jubilees to the understanding of the law is its emphasis on the cosmic calendar. Observing time, especially the Sabbath, festivals, and Jubilee years, is central to aligning with the divine order. In Jubilees, these laws of timekeeping are described as being written on the heavenly tablets, making them part of the universal rhythm. Unlike the lunar calendar used in traditional Jewish practice, Jubilees advocates for a solar calendar with a year consisting of 364 days. This system ensures that all festivals and Sabbaths fall on their proper days. The text warns that deviating from this divine calendar can lead to spiritual disorder. And the Lord spoke to Moses and said, "Write down for Israel the law of the Sabbath and the festivals, for these times are ordained on the heavenly tablets. You must observe them exactly, lest you fall into error." Jubilees 52:2. This focus on the cosmic calendar contrasts with the traditional Bible, where the Sabbath and festivals are important but lack this pronounced cosmic dimension. For Jubilees, adhering to this calendar is crucial for remaining in God's favor and aligning human life with the divine rhythm of the universe. The eternal law. While the Mosaic law in the Bible is given specifically to the Israelites, Jubilees presents these laws as eternal. They are binding not only for Israel, but for all generations, and even for the angels. The laws written on the heavenly tablets are portrayed as universal commandments governing both heaven and earth. In Jubilees, the angels are depicted as observing the Sabbath and God's festivals in heaven, making the law part of the fabric of the cosmos. This extends the Mosaic law beyond humanity, connecting the spiritual and physical realms. And the law that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai is eternal and will be observed in heaven and on earth. The angels keep the Sabbath, and the righteous will observe the commandments forever. Jubilees 50:13. This portrayal of the law as eternal differs from the traditional Bible, which focuses on the covenant between God and Israel. In Jubilees, the law is a universal and timeless order binding both angels and humans to God's cosmic plan, Israel's destiny, and the heavenly tablets. In Jubilees, Israel's future is not left to chance. It is part of a divinely ordained timeline, written on the heavenly tablets from the beginning of time. This timeline outlines the rise and fall of nations, the exile and return of Israel, and the eventual judgment of the world. Everything in human history, from creation to the final judgment, follows the cosmic schedule recorded in heaven. Jubilees insists that these events are preordained, with nothing occurring outside God's divine plan. And all that will come upon Israel was written on the heavenly tablets, from their rebellion to their redemption. The times appointed for their deliverance were fixed long ago. Jubilees 23:32. While Genesis and Exodus focus on specific events in Israel's history, Jubilees offers a broader view, showing that Israel's destiny is part of a larger cosmic narrative that has already been determined. Angels and the End Times. The role of angels is a recurring theme in Jubilees, becoming even more significant in the end times. The angels of the Lord are depicted as executing God's judgment on nations, ensuring his divine will is carried out both in heaven and on earth. As the end of days approaches, Jubilees describes how angels will descend to separate the righteous from the wicked, gathering those who have remained faithful to God's commandments. The text also introduces the idea that Mastema, the leader of the evil spirits, will be bound and cast into the abyss, symbolizing the ultimate defeat of darkness. And the Lord will send his angels to gather his chosen, and they shall bind the prince of the evil spirits, casting him into the abyss until the time of judgment, when he shall be destroyed forever. Jubilees 23:29. Prophecy in the Book of Jubilees. Prophecy is a major theme in the Book of Jubilees, providing a detailed and fascinating vision of the role angels will play in the spiritual battles that unfold in the last days. While the traditional Bible speaks of angels mainly in the context of judgment, as in Revelation, Jubilees offers a broader, more intricate view of their involvement in the end times. A key prophetic theme in Jubilees is the redemption of Israel. Despite Israel's history of rebellion and exile, the book assures us that God has already set a time when the nation will be restored to its land and renewed in its covenant with him. But this restoration isn't just about politics or territory. It's a deep spiritual renewal that fits perfectly into the larger cosmic plan written in the heavenly tablets. Jubilees tells us that Israel's redemption will come after a period of great tribulation, a time of purification for the nation. The law will be re-established, and the people will walk in holiness again, preparing the way for the Messiah's arrival and the establishment of God's kingdom here on earth. And the time will come when the children of Israel will turn back to the Lord with all their heart, and he will gather them from the nations and establish them in their land, as it was written on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees 23:26. While other parts of the Bible, like Isaiah and Jeremiah, also talk about Israel's future restoration, Jubilees adds an intriguing layer. It suggests that this restoration is part of a set, predetermined timeline, with specific events already recorded in the heavenly records. In the final chapters of Jubilees, we get a glimpse of the coming Messianic kingdom. This kingdom will be ruled by God's chosen ruler, often interpreted as the Messiah, who will bring righteousness to the earth. The book emphasizes that this kingdom will signal the end of the current age and the start of God's eternal reign, where his law will be upheld and the righteous will inherit the earth. Finally, Jubilees presents a picture of the final judgment, where the righteous will be separated from the wicked. The wicked will face their fate, and the righteous will inherit God's kingdom on earth. This marks the ultimate fulfillment of God's promises.